Welcome to Recross the Paths, a compact cube conversation with designers and curators. Be sure to check out the show notes for links to Kade's cubes and for cards referenced during this episode. Hello, my name is Kade, and today my guest is Kade. I'm certain this
Hi.
will not be confusing to anyone. Kade, how are you?
I'm doing well. I've had a good day today, and I'm happy to be here talking about my favorite cube.
Excellent. Well, listeners may be familiar with you for a couple of projects you've done, like Descend into Avernus or Way Too Hybrid, or many, many others. But we're not going to talk about either of those today. Today, we're going to talk about the Cut Rate Commander Cube.
Yeah, this is my baby. This is my peasant commander cube with a lot of other restrictions on it.
Yeah, and we'll absolutely get to dive into those. Could you start by giving us the elevator pitch for the Cut Rate Commander Cube?
This is my attempt to push back at what people would expect when they hear the name Commander Cube. It's designed to be fast and very combat focused. The games are supposed to be usually about half an hour. It's designed to have very simple board states, uh, very much contrasting against the sort of bloated expectations people think when they hear Commander Cube or Commander in general. I will mention that this cube is actually part of a series of 10 cubes. Not all of them are built. Some of them are actually very early concepting, but it created a structure for a set of 10 cubes. They're all sort of very experimental three-color commander cubes that sort of follow in its wake of trying to be generally a little faster to draft, generally cheaper and smaller in their profile. And I think it's made for a very interesting project.
You noted that this is kind of an offshoot of your main cube, which I love is labeled the Big Cube.
Yeah, so this is almost a direct response to the Big Cube. I love the Big Cube. The Big Cube is one of my favorite cubes I own. My playgroup loves the Big Cube. Most of the things that I'm pushing back against with this cube aren't things that I want to change about the Big Cube, but they're things that make the Big Cube not great for every situation. It is a cube that has almost 2,000 cards in it at this point.
Goodness gracious.
Most of those aren't drafted. It's a little weirdly structured, but it's not important today. But it's very bloated. It's hard to move around. It has a lot of expensive cards that I don't really want to play with people I don't necessarily know very well because I don't want cards to wander off. And also, the cards in it are really like complicated and long textbooks. The games take forever. There's a lot of things that make it so that you need a very specific setting to want to play the Big Cube. And the cut rate is kind of designed to push back against all of those things, being fast, cheap, very lightweight, very easily accessible cards so that I can replace things, that sort of stuff.
How does the Cut Rate Commander Cube address some of the potential challenges of something almost 2,000 cards in size?
Well, first of all, it's I think it's a little bit more than 240. It's designed to support up to 6 drafters, but the ideal sweet spot is 3 players, which is a fun little. It's a fun little niche that you don't get to explore. 3-player games are kind of the thing that people tend to try to avoid in Magic. Um, and that was where a lot of my pods were ending up because I can't get that many people together for a lot of the time. So having something that's perfect for 3 people, which at the time that I built this, we had 3 people in our apartment who played Magic, um, was very useful. Um, it's a little bit smaller to that end. It is a lot faster to draft. 6 packs of 6 is surprisingly like very, very fast to read through a pack and make your decisions because there's a lot less complicated decisions.
And that's only 2 picks per pack as well, which moves very quickly, I imagine.
It's nice. It's honestly that's about what you would expect for a 8-player draft, but it makes it work with 3 players. It also is designed to be very focused on being on the board. Life totals are lower, so those games just go much, much quicker.
Something we haven't touched on yet is that this cube is entirely Esper. What drew you to Esper in particular for this project?
So, like I mentioned earlier, this was designed for my home play group that was the people who, at the time, I lived in an apartment with. And when I went into this, I knew I wanted to restrict it to 3 colors. The choice of what 3 colors is mostly the 3 colors that I thought those people would most enjoy playing. In particular, I have one drafter who is very insistent that she does not like playing red. So red was a pretty easy cutoff, and ultimately, after talking with everyone, Esper seemed to be where we wanted it to land. The reason I wanted it to be 3 colors is because that works a lot better with smaller pods and smaller cubes because it forces people to kind of crash into each other while drafting a lot more. There's less space in a 3 color cube, so it creates that kind of friction that you'll see in an 8-player pod because people will be drafting similar colors. Whereas in a 3-player pod, with 5 colors, people aren't going to be running into each other very much. They're going to kind of find their lanes and not find those friction points.
That's great. I actually I like how practical that is to suggest that in a small environment you need a smaller play space to force some of that friction.
Yeah, it was one of the first things that I came up with when I wanted to make a smaller cube. It has a bunch of really pleasant knock-ons that I've found over the years of doing this. Like it works a lot better with the smaller packs because you're much more likely to see all the colors in a smaller pack if there are fewer colors.
So one of the other restrictions for this environment is peasant. So you're using only uncommons and down. Was that something that started out at the beginning of the project, or did that get added in?
It was pretty early on that I came up with the concept of putting it as peasant because I wanted it to be that those simpler cards that were a little easier to read for the newer players. I wanted it to be cheap and I wanted it to be combat focused, and peasant just kind of made sense for those things.
And it sounds like those are direct answers to some of the challenges of the big cube that you addressed
Exactly.
cost, you addressed complexity in a lot of ways with those.
Yeah, yeah. Pretty much everything in here is almost a direct response to Big Cube. A lot of my later cubes, I was happier to kind of reintroduce elements of the Big Cube into those projects, but this one was very streamlined, focused on being a response to that.
So does the M15 card frame also come from something you were wanting to push back against, or is this a different type of restriction?
I feel like a broken record, but it's another thing that is kind of response to Big Cube because if you look at a pack of Big Cube, half of the cards don't even look like Magic cards. I really like that about the environment. I really like that it's like showy and over the top, and it's not sort of trying to be reverent to traditional Magic expectations. But I wanted this to be very visually consistent, and I'm not a big old border person. I have nothing against old border, but it's not the era of Magic that I really started in. So I wanted something newer, but I wanted a consistent border. M15 made a lot of sense to me.
Have you found either peasant or M15 frame to be difficult restrictions to maintain as you're creating, or have those been more of helpful guideposts?
Much more the latter, honestly. It makes it a lot easier when a new set comes out for me to actually keep up with updating this cube because it takes about 2 seconds to look over the relevant cards. There have been moments where I have had small frustrations. A favorite of mine is I can't play Sword of the Meek in this cube because while it has had an M15 frame printing and it has had an uncommon printing, it has not had them at the same time.
Oh,
So,
amazing.
so I can't get a version that is an uncommon or an M15 frame version that doesn't have a security stamp on it.
That I didn't think about that, but that yeah. So like on principle, you just can't have the stamp on that one.
Yeah, and like I could break these rules, but I don't know. I like keeping that very, very strict aesthetic consideration.
Well, Kate, in addition to restrictions that have guided how this cube has taken shape, you also have a number of additional and alternate rules. Do you want to give us a brief overview of what that looks like?
All right, let's see how many of these I can recall off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure I've got them all. So the first one, and this is one of the only things that I actually hold over from the big cube because I thought it was a great design decision when I made it then, was that everything that sounds like partner is partner. That just makes a lot of sense for the purposes of trying to make a limited card pool work where there aren't as many partner commanders as I would like. So I get to dip into backgrounds and choose a background. There is also a rule that First Blood in the game is going to take the initiative if the initiative isn't already in the game. That's because I realized very quickly while looking at the card pool, I needed to have dungeons play a role because way too many of my commander options cared about dungeons and the initiative. And if I didn't use that, I was going to be cutting off a massive portion of my available design space. There is also a rule that initiative works different. I don't love having to use this, but I knew very early on I was going to have to because I can't just have people entering the Undercity on turn 2 because the Undercity is kind of a messed up dungeon. But I wanted the Undercity to still be there. It felt like it added stakes to the game. So what I decided was you have to finish one of the AFR dungeons before you enter the Undercity. So the first time you take the initiative, you enter either Lost Mine of Phandelver, Dungeon of the Mad Mage, or Tomb of Annihilation, and once you've finished it, you can go into the Undercity, and that creates a pace of play that I really like. The game is constantly escalating as you see it progressing towards the bottom of the kind of dungeon track.
And even if it's not the Undercity right off the bat, you do have to get your hands dirty. Like you have to go get it, or else your opponents are going to run away with the game.
Yeah, otherwise your opponents are going to get that massive value later in the game, where the earlier game stakes are much lower, but they're building towards a problem. And if you don't have that tempo, which everything in this cube is kind of about tempo and velocity, then you're not going to be on pace when you actually do get to the stage of the game that people are in the Undercity. There is also another custom rule that I have where in two-player games, the player who goes second gets to pick if they want to draw their card for turn or if they want to get a step into the dungeon for free. This is because the Drago disparity was just absolutely massive in this environment, and I needed to mitigate it somehow, otherwise it was going to feel horrible.
Did it feel like that change helped address that?
Yeah, it makes a huge difference. Notably with 3 players, the third player, because they are so far behind in that race, gets to actually do both. They get one step into the dungeon and they get their card for turn.
But they don't take the initiative. They're just getting a step there to try to catch up a little bit.
Yeah, I didn't want the start of the initiative because that's a little awkward to have someone start the game with the initiative because turn 1 usually no one's taking the initiative. There are some big asterisks there. There's a ginger brute in here. There's a banehound in here. Um,
Yeah.
that are notably far more powerful cards than you would expect just reading them, because taking the initiative on turn one is uh, such an advantage when most people can't take it back turn one.
That's really interesting.
Yeah, in particular, Ginger Brute is basically considered power. Several of my players consider it the best card in the cube and the easiest first pick.
Because you can then get through, like almost nothing else will have haste, so you can continue to get through for damage, take the initiative back.
Yeah, especially the color restrictions on the environment mean, well, we're not playing red, so the only way things generally have haste is if they have boots on. So those are the big three custom rules. I think those are the only real custom rules that aren't just like structural to the draft. There is also that the draft structure is just different. It is 6 packs of 6 cards, and commanders are handled separately than that. At the start of the draft, players are handed 6 commanders face down, just shuffled up and hand everyone 6. And you get to look at those and figure out kind of where you're going based on that. And then in between packs 1 and 2, 3 and 4, and 5 and 6, you have the option to send back any number of those commanders to get random new ones from the pool of possible commanders, because I wanted there to be a sort of way to have some flexibility with who your commander is and be able to pivot later. I want players to feel like they can drop a color later and like pick up a different color. And that's part of why I really wanted those partner commanders in there, and have maximum flexibility with those partner commanders, because that's what lets players actually pivot their secondary color very easily, because they can still keep one of their commanders and change colors.
Do your players find it easy to keep track of a number of custom rules like that? Is there a sort of reminder card or process that goes with that?
So this is a benefit of having a specific play group that I've designed this in mind for. They have played this cube a lot at this point, so I don't need like a constant reminder card or anything. They know the rules. For one of them, this has honestly been their primary early engagement in Magic, so it's very formative for them. It's a weird cube to sort of get someone started with Magic in, but here we are.
And the sky's the limit if this is your starting point.
Yeah, I suppose. But yeah, because this is not something I normally bring into groups that aren't used to it, I don't really have to worry about that. I actually took this to CubeCon and very quickly realized that it was kind of a problem how many custom rules that I had in it, as far as like bringing it to conventions and accessibility goes, because I realized that my explanation of how to draft this went on for like 15 minutes, and I was not prepared with like helpful reminder cards or anything like that.
So as you consider this kind of setup, then would you recommend that other designers consider rules changes like this? Are there elements of this that you would take and apply to other environments?
Yeah, absolutely. There are a bunch of these changes that I've carried forward to other cubes of mine, while I've kept in mind with future projects since then to kind of keep my custom rules a little lighter. There are a lot of these that I think are actually just general good practice and interesting. Notably, I actually really like how commanders work in this environment. I keep meaning to draft Big Cube while using these sort of commander draft mechanics of being handed commanders early and getting to kind of shuffle them back. I think that that's honestly my favorite way that out of all the cubes that I've had, sort of experimenting different ways to get commanders to people, that's the way that I've liked the best. Beyond that, I do generally recommend for everyone making a commander cube that they just let partner be kind of freeform. It really opens up your ability to pick out your card pool because you have more options for partner commanders, uh, and it like speeds it up a little bit for players trying to figure out like, am I going to be able to get the second half of this specific partner mechanic? Isn't a question when everything is basically partner.
So speaking of pivoting, when I did a test draft of this environment, I found that I was tempted to pivot basically every pack. What have you done to create an environment that feels open like that, or to provide a lot of different directions to pursue?
So this is something that I learned over the, I don't know, decade since I started working on the big cube, was that I like having a draft environment where the archetypes don't feel super locked in. I want everything to be a little less kind of nailed down and have cards be open to being played in as many archetypes as I could possibly manage to get them in, and have that less tied down to color specifically, which lets players feel like they're building their own decks as they go. And benefit of that is it lets players adjust their focus as they go because they're realizing, looking back at their card pool, that a lot of their cards work towards things other than just what they were planning on doing. Like stuff like Whirler Rogue is my favorite example, where this is a card that there's a lot of different angles that you can take with it. It is helpful if you are looking into a deck around tokens. It's helpful if you are looking into a deck around enters the battlefield abilities, artifacts, specifically more of a saboteur's angle where you get triggers on hitting players and like controlling the initiative is also somewhere that you can take it. And I wanted as many cards as possible to kind of feel like that, like they're pulling you in a bunch of different possible directions, and you won't be unhappy if the one that you were planning on initially doesn't follow through.
Do you feel like there's a rule of thumb that you can apply when searching for cards that would do that sort of thing, or is it a bit more of something you would discover by feel or experience?
I wish there was a rule of thumb that made that simpler to kind of search through, but no, it's mostly by feel. It's mostly that I just know the card pool, and I can kind of see when looking through a card how many different angles are relevant to an environment, and I just spend way too long on Scryfall. Spending too much time on Scryfall is a excellent skill to have as a cube curator.
What have you found most surprising about the design process for the cut rate Commander Cube?
I found that it was a very interesting exercise in committing to the bit because I didn't expect early on how hard I would end up committing by the end of it to everything being incredibly low to the ground. I was not expecting that I would cut every single 5 drop or 4 drop basically that I was planning on running out because I wanted everything to kind of be about that velocity. The more I drafted it, the more I realized the fun was how quickly everything dropped to the board and casting 2 or 3 spells a turn.
What advice would you offer to other designers based on your experience with this project, either on small form cubes or cube design in general?
So, my first bit of advice for small form cubes is color restrictions. Every time someone asks about building a smaller cube, I always recommend chopping out 1 or 2 colors because it creates that tension in the draft where otherwise it won't, and it keeps players from having to draft 3 or 4 colors to try to fill up the possibility space in like maybe a 1v1 draft. I feel like in a 1v1 draft, players are very often inclined to play 3 or 4 colors because there's just so many cards available that no one's picking. Where if you cut it down to 3 colors, that's not really a concern. You don't have those free floating colors that aren't being drafted because there just isn't that much room. I would also recommend actually considering color identity for your commander cubes. This is a point of contention that I get into with a lot of people, but I don't think color identity is right for every cube, but I think people are a little too quick to just toss it out. And also sometimes a little too quick to just go with it because it's what Commander is. You should honestly think about what it does to serve your environment. In a 3 color environment, color identity is incredibly valuable at kind of locking people into their lanes a little bit so that not everyone is drafting 3 colors. When there's only 3 colors, everyone kind of wants to take all of them, is something that I've realized. And if you restrict color identity for most drafters to just 2, then it actually makes players kind of commit to 2 colors and not just draft a pile of all the best cards that they can run into.
You have designed a lot of other projects, and you are kind of known for being able to quickly draft up a new idea based on a single kernel. Is there an art to designing cubes quickly, or is that also part of spending a lot of time on Scryfall, or what's the secret to that?
I think that the most important thing is to view it kind of as chiseling something out of a block of marble, where there's this aphorism that it's just like the statue is in there, you just need to find it in there and like chisel away the things you don't need. When you find that little kernel that you want to work with, like with Descent into Avernus, it was Descent into Avernus. I wanted it there, is to take that and really ask what it wants you to build. In the case of the cut rate commander cube, it was the card pool, where I said, okay, I want this to be peasant. I want this to be restricted to these colors. And that really handed me a sort of a slate of commanders that I had to work with. There weren't that many commanders available when I started this project that were even valid choices. There still aren't the most, but there's a good amount more. And that's how I ended up finding the ideas of where this card pool wanted me to go, was seeing stuff like there's a lot of commanders that want dungeons to be a thing. Then that should be a central focus of this cube. And it's just following the direction that the card pool is actually telling you to go. And it's also about finding those restrictions that give you a direction.
So, Kate, are we at risk of suggesting that restrictions breed creativity?
Yeah, I am very, very much of the wisdom that restrictions breed creativity. Restrictions, less so than even restrictions breed creativity, restrictions direct your thoughts in useful directions. They actually give you a sort of jumping off point where otherwise it's very easy to get overwhelmed. Whereas once you say, okay, I want this to be peasant, I want this to be M15 frames, I want this to be very low to the ground, I want this to be only an Esper, well, suddenly I don't need to think about a lot of different possibility spaces out there. I'm being told what I'm building, and that's a lot easier to digest.
When your block of marble is 30,000 cards, it becomes daunting.
You're going to spend a lot of time with a chisel. And when your block of marble is, I don't know, 3,000, 5,000 cards, even that's a lot, but it's a big, big difference in the amount of marble you have to chisel off.
Well said. You've laid a bit of a groundwork to this question already, but what's next for you as a designer or as a player?
I still have about 3 cubes in my series of 10 tricolor cubes that I still need to build. That would be Jund, Jeskai, and Bant. Everything else I have, at the very least, a workable framework that can be tested. Those three, I still have a lot of work I need to do. Uh, I also just have about a billion different ideas that I honestly shouldn't put a lot of energy into building because I have enough cubes, but that's never stopped me before.
Yeah, and what's the fun in that?
Exactly.
By way of wrap up, if you could have any card printed as a judge promo, what card would it be and who would you have do the illustration?
Okay, who would I have do the illustration is hard. Um, I'm not as much of a magic art buff. Um, I do like Wayne Reynolds. I'm just a sucker for the Wandering Emperor, but I don't think Wayne Reynolds is probably the best choice for a Wandering Emperor judge
that'd be a
promo.
pretty that'd be a pretty aggressive Wandering Emperor.
But I don't know who I would actually pick for that. Like, okay, there is the thought in my head of a Rebecca Guay Wandering Emperor would be really cool, but that's not going to happen. But it's an interesting thought.
Well, that's the hope, is to curate interesting thoughts. Well, Kate, this has been an absolute delight. Thank you for taking the time to share about this project and, my goodness, and touching on so many others that you're working on.
Yeah, I'm happy to come on here and talk. It's really not hard to get me to wax poetic about cube design. So thank you for giving me a platform for that.
Absolutely. If people want to learn more about the Cut Rate Commander Cube in particular, or perhaps any of your other projects, where would be the best place to point them?
I would love to point them to my Cube Cobra profile because that's where you can find all of my cubes. You can see all the cubes in that series of 10. You can see the big cube. You can see Way Too Hybrid, which is going to be at CubeCon this year. And what else is on there? Oh, the Hoop, my Doctor Who set cube.
There's a lot to explore. If you have a relaxing evening, you can spend a lot of time exploring a lot of Kate's designs. Well, thank you again, and I hope we have other opportunities to connect soon.
I hope so.